Welcome. In this episode, we are going to continue our discussion of the Protestant Reformation and continue on with the Reformation in England. We left off with the struggle of King Henry VIII of England to divorce his wife, Catherine of Aragon, because of the alleged incest that she committed with his brother before they were married. More practically speaking, Catherine was now likely too old to have any more children and had only borne one healthy daughter. Henry, because of how he came to the throne and the fact that his father had basically seized power during the War of the Roses, very much feared a war of dynastic succession if he didn't have a son. So he absolutely wanted to get a legal and church permitted divorce from his wife and to marry a younger, hopefully more fertile woman and hopefully have a son or many sons. When the church would not budge, he arranged with Parliament to pass the Act of Supremacy, which declared he himself, Henry, the head of the Church of England. He did not intend for this to per se mean he was joining the Reformation. In his eyes, he thought that, kings in Germany had done things like this, sort of like this before. Kings of France had certain privileges, and he wanted this authority. However, because the Reformation was going on and there were wars, people were dying over these church doctrines in Germany, because his wife's nephew was arguably the most powerful man in the world and about the most powerful man in the Catholic Church. This would mean separation from Rome, separation from the Catholic Church. And so Henry is excommunicated and just continues on his way. He makes relatively few changes. He desires to see himself as still in the Catholic Church. One of his close friends and top advisors was his chancellor, Sir Thomas More. Thomas More refuses to take the oath invoked in the Act of Supremacy because he believes it goes against his conscience as a Catholic to respect the Pope's authority on matters of granting a dispensation or not, that the Pope has the authority to recognize a marriage or not, and that King Henry is not the head of the Church of England just because he in Parliament says that he is. As a result, he has his friend stripped of power and then imprisoned, and when he really still won't agree to sign the document, Thomas More is beheaded, for which in the Catholic Church they call him St. Thomas More, because they see him as a martyr, someone who stood up for his conscience and was killed for it, for refusing to violate his belief in the Church and the Pope's authority over such matters. This, again, only aggravates the situation between England and Rome and effectively marks the establishment of the Anglican Church, or the Church of England. The word Anglican is kind of a adjective that pertains to English. So the English can be English or Anglican, so it's the Anglican Church, the Church of England. Ultimately, Henry is a bit unlucky in love. He marries a total of 6 times. He marries the young Anne Boleyn. He asks himself for a divorce, and the archbishop whom he created for a divorce, they give it to him, and so he puts away his old wife of 24 years, Catherine of Aragon, marries a younger woman, but she has miscarriages and only a daughter who survives, and he starts getting impatient with her. We think she was true to him, but that he invents the charge of having an affair with someone, which he calls treason. And here's the reason for that. Is he just being vain? Like, if you cheat on the king, that's treason? Well, it is in a way, because if the queen has an affair and gets pregnant with some other man's child, then that child could become the king, and therefore it's like a way to steal being the king from the king's own natural children. So that's the logic behind why cheating on the king, if you're the queen, cheating on the king can be treason in that language, is because it's like trying to steal the right of being king from the king's children. So he accused Anne Boleyn of cheating on him, has her beheaded. He marries another woman, Jane Seymour, who bears him a son who will be King Edward. He was very happy about that, but she got sick during childbirth and died, which was very common. I believe, many women died as complications, because while childbirth is not exactly surgery, it does involve the possibility of infection and different things that can happen. So and bleeding and things. So childbirth can actually be pretty dangerous. And many women died of that. And so the king's own wife did, and that was not at all uncommon. He married several other times. He married Anne of Cleves. She was sort of like a mail order bride. They were only married 6 months. He had an arranged marriage with her, but when he met her, apparently he thought she was too ugly, and so then, but he had to go through with the marriage because it was already all like planned, and then 6 months later divorced her. He then married a really young and beautiful woman who really did seemingly cheat on him with all sorts of other men. He found out about it and had her beheaded for treason. And then he married another woman whom they were married a few years, but in 1547, Henry died. And so there's a little rhyme that goes: divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived, because she survived him. And so that old unlucky in love Henry, he had 6 wives, 3 children, and the irony is all 3 of his children, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward, would actually all become king or queen in their own right. First Edward, then Mary, then Elizabeth. All 3 of his children would become king or queen. He had 6 wives, 3 children, and no grandchildren, which will be ironic. We'll get to that in just a moment. So, what happens before we get to their reigns? What did this mean that Henry had broken with Rome? Did he have all of Luther's theology? Well, no. Remember, Henry wrote a book defending like everything the Catholic Church did. He made relatively few changes. One was to abandon using Latin in church texts and prayers and the Mass. Priests were permitted to marry in England now. Closed the convents and monasteries, which is going to always be a big deal in places that break with the Catholic Church and become Protestant, and a big obstacle to any king that had become a Protestant and wanted to come back to the Catholic Church. And here's why. When people die, they have property. And as the saying goes, you can't take it with you. So you leave it to your children typically. Not everyone has children, and some people have so much property they leave it to even more people. Well, what is the main charity or charitable institution to leave your property to? The church. And then multiply by hundreds and hundreds of years. So over the centuries, the church acquires lots of land from mainly from people who are being charitable or from people who die without children. And so the church acquires this land and it just accumulates. And a lot of it is held by these convents and monasteries that we talked about. And so this allows the monks and nuns who live there to effectively not be farmers all the time, because they own the land. The peasants work the land. They give it to the monks and to the bishops and to the church. And they, especially the monks, are able to live a life of prayer in the monastery. Well, if the king closes all the convents and monasteries, he can take all the land. And not so much to keep the land and all of its income to himself, but he can give that land and its title to people who support him. So see, in England, a big issue is not as much problems people had with church teaching or corruption, but one of the things is Henry's power and the way that he would have executed people who stood in his way. And he would gift land that was taken from the church to the people who supported him the most. And so as he is head of the Church of England, he doesn't see it as a new church. He makes relatively few changes, a few that increase his power and standing with his friends, a few things that he thought made sense to him. but then he dies. When he dies, his oldest and only living legitimate son becomes king, but he dies as a teenager before he has any children. And he kind of continued in this break from the church. The Catholic Church would not reconcile with Edward because, again, his mother was Anne Boleyn, who the church didn't recognize that marriage because Henry gave himself a divorce that the church didn't recognize. And so he just kind of continued that simple, split with the church where things were still very, very Catholic, just with a few changes. And the rest of the Catholic world said, no, you've broken with the church. You need to come back. Well, when he died, who would be the next king? Well, there were a few options. You could go back up the family tree. You could look at all of these things. You could have another repeat of the Wars of the Roses. There were different options, but Parliament coalesced around Henry's oldest child, Mary the First, which is so ironic because Henry was so worried that no one would accept his daughter as the ruler that he went to all that trouble and married and killed several of those women whom he took as his wife. And so Parliament agreed and crowned Mary as queen. But remember, she's the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. Remember that she was a devout Catholic and was loyal to the Catholic Church and was put aside for that. And so Mary returns England fully to the Catholic Church, and is nicknamed by the Protestants as Bloody Mary, that she persecuted the Protestants. She was also married to Philip II of Spain, who is much younger than her and was a very vibrant, active, war-seeking monarch who was, fighting and winning wars, is very wealthy. Remember, we're going to get to this in next unit, but Spain is acquiring its empire. This is in the half century after Columbus, right around the time of Cortez and the conquistadors, where Spain is getting fabulously wealthy over its trade contacts and conquests due to colonialism and imperialism. So Philip II is very rich and powerful, not warmongering per se, but a war leader of Spain and a very devout Catholic. And they restore England to Catholic Church. Now, it's one of those sort of ironies that where the winners write the history, because, Mary persecuted the Protestants, but then she dies. And her sister Elizabeth becomes queen and persecutes the Catholics and sort of killed, more Catholics than Mary killed Protestants. But because the winners write the history, and Elizabeth and the Protestants win, Mary earns the nickname Bloody Mary because of persecuting the Protestants in England during her reign. Well, but when Mary dies, they're again in a pickle because her and her husband Philip never had any children. So then it goes to Henry's last surviving daughter, Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn. Excuse me, I said earlier, Edward VI was not Anne Boleyn's son, but was Jane Seymour. But again, not his first wife. Not the son of Henry's first wife. Elizabeth is the daughter of Anne Boleyn, and that's not entirely relevant, just helping you keep track. Elizabeth is Anglican by necessity. The Catholic Church won't accept her again because her mother's marriage to her father is not considered legitimate. But Parliament wanted her. King Philip argues that he's still the king of England. He's the king of Spain. He's also the king of England. He had married Queen Mary, so he should still be the king. But he had kind of worn out his welcome, and people had kind of soured on Mary and Philip, and they didn't want the Catholic cousins from Scotland. There were many who thought they could control the young Princess Elizabeth, the young pretty Elizabeth, and furthermore, right, in this age of men ruling, they not only thought that the nobles in Parliament could control this young princess, now Queen Elizabeth, they all also thought that they, if they were single, or their oldest son, would be the perfect match to marry young Queen Elizabeth, and therefore really control her and kind of get into the royal household. But as we will see next time, Elizabeth would have none of that. Thanks for watching.